And we are now recording. So good afternoon. This is Jen Bonet with the Creative Coast. I'm the Executive Director of the Creative Coast, and welcome to one of our lunchtime topics. Today we have with us one of our own members, Shannon James, who lives in the Savannah area and is an active Creative Coast member. And today she is going to be talking about mindset, and specifically kind of dealing, we're 5 weeks, almost 6 weeks into this sheltering at home. So how can you manage your mindset and do positive shifts, hopefully to get more things done and be successful in navigating these crazy times that we're in. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Shannon.
Thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. So let's see if, I think I first need to share it and then start the slideshow. So we'll see if we can start with that.
We see it. Awesome.
Yeah. Okay, great. Sorry, go ahead. You're gonna mute.
I'm gonna mute myself and you have control.
So thanks everyone for joining today, and thank you, Jen, for asking me to talk. And so as Jen mentioned, I am a success coach and a business consultant. So I've worked in the consulting coaching realm for almost 25 years now and had my own business for 15. And as any of you know who are business owners, or even if you're a leader or work with a team in an organization, you know that a resilient mindset is really important, not just for your own personal experience, but for professional success. And so I'm going to talk today about 4 habits that you can actively cultivate to strengthen that, which is something that's important at all times, but especially given the circumstances that we're in today. And so before I dive in, I just want to get on the same page about what resilience is. And I want to invite you to think about anyone that you've worked with that you think of as a resilient person, or maybe a time when you've seen some of these qualities in yourself. And so in the simplest definition, resiliency is our ability to adapt or to bounce back when things don't go as planned. And so qualities that I think of for resilient people and organizations that I've worked with is they don't dwell on failures, and yet they do acknowledge the reality of a situation. So it's not that they're putting a happy face sticker or a Band-Aid over things and pretending they didn't mess up or something didn't go as planned. They're acknowledging that reality. They're looking at how they can learn from it, and then they're making smart adjustments to be able to move forward. Which sounds simple, right? 4 steps, you do that, you're resilient, but it's not always easy, as I'm sure you know, to put into place. And yet it's really important to cultivate this quality of a resilient mindset. And it's especially important right now. It's one of the tools that I know I'm using with so much uncertainty in the world and so much that is just very much out of our control. And so I want to share just a personal story of how this affected me, the situation that we're finding ourselves in, where we're working remotely and a lot of businesses are closed down, and just unprecedented times, right, that none of us have been through before. And so a couple of weeks ago, I found that this really impacted me in a way that was somewhat unexpected. So I work from a home office. I worked from a home office here. I'm out on Whitmarsh Island in the Savannah area. And I've worked from a home office since I started my business 15 years ago. And so although I occasionally travel to customer sites, most of my days are spent working from a home office and doing a series of Zoom video conferences, a lot like what we're doing right now. And so the story that I was telling myself was, well, I'm pretty fortunate, right? This doesn't impact me in the way that it's impacting a lot of people. I can, to some extent, go about business as usual. But then I had a really unproductive day a couple of weeks ago, and I woke up, I was feeling fine, and I sat down in my office and I got thrown off with a technical issue. I had to print a document and sign it, and long story short, the printer that I'd actually had an IT person set up for me and I thought was set up correctly wasn't working, and it took me about an hour to fix. So, right, these things happen. You end up taking time to deal with technical issues if you have your own business. But what happened after that was what was concerning to me, which was that I felt like the rest of the day was really thrown off, and my productivity wasn't where it needed to be, and it was a bit of a wash. So, I mean, I showed up to the video conferences I had scheduled with clients, of course, and I accomplished a few of the tasks that I had in place, but most of that was by sheer force of will. And I used some productivity tools that I had to get myself back on track. But the reality was that I did the equivalent of about 2.5 hours of work, and I had about 5 hours of work I needed to do. And so I took a minute the next day. And for me, I'd been in this situation of working from home and, being cautious about going to the grocery store, not going out to see friends, that sort of thing, for a couple of weeks when this hit. And I sat down to look at what was going on, and I realized that even though my daily work life had not changed dramatically, everything else around me had changed pretty dramatically, right? So even though I was still working from my home office, I was still doing Zoom video conferences, and I was even busier than usual because I'm working right now with a healthcare client that's in the tech space, and I've been assisting in their response to the pandemic. So I had actually been busier than usual and not less busy. So as I was looking at all of that, I realized that, even though what's happening in the world may not have, knock on wood, directed me and directly impacted me, and I've been healthy and I've been able to continue work and stay busy, it was taking a toll on me in the background. Almost like an app that's running on your phone that's taking up batteries. It's using power from the phone, and you don't even realize it's doing it. And there were a few ways that I was experiencing that impact, and that it was building up over a course of weeks, and it was impacting my productivity, and it was impacting my mindset. And so I sat down and just took a look at what was happening. So one thing is that I'm working with teams in cities that are very directly impacted. So I'm working with a client right now in Toronto, Canada. I'm working with a client right now in New York. Those are cities where their day-to-day life has been altered and will continue to be for probably a much longer time than we may be fortunate to be impacted here. I also have friends who've gotten sick. I have friends that are struggling with their business because they're not in a position where they can just switch and do video conferences, and they've had to shut their doors, or they've had to let employees go. And so even though maybe my workday hadn't been impacted that dramatically, I was surrounded by people that were really struggling and having a hard time. And I also had my fair share of impacts, right? It is not a normal day for me to be at home without engaging and interacting with people. I usually am out and about more. I'm usually traveling to client sites and sitting with them in person at least a few times a month, or going out to dinner, or, not thinking so much about, is it safe to go to the grocery store? And if I go to the grocery store, what time should I go? Should I wear a mask? These are all things that we're all dealing with in an unprecedented way. And so what I acknowledged was that I was starting the day off, and I imagine that most of us are, with a tax on our mindset, like an emotional tax that we may not be fully conscious of. And so that means that for the rest of the day, as we're in this situation, we might be running at, say, 80% of our usual resources, 80% of our focus and concentration. And every day is not going to be the same, right? But if you've had a day that you had a struggle, you didn't feel like you were as productive as usual, whether you've got kids with you at home and you're working from a home office and it's difficult to find time to focus, or just the concerns and some understandable anxiety about what's going on, and there's a lot of uncertainty. I want to invite you, as we're talking today, to just acknowledge that and allow yourself to be okay with it, that everyone in some way or another is impacted by this. And it may be taking a toll on your energy. It may be taking a toll on your emotional resources. And that may translate into you not being as much on your game as you're used to. So I'm going to pause. I see a question here, or a chat.
That's just me commenting. I've had a ton of bad days. And then I alternate between this thing of, like, it's hard for me not to be essential.
Yeah.
I'm in a category that's non-essential. I'm like, wow, I'm not essential. What can I do to be essential? Right?
How can I make an impact?
Wow, this is so hard. Um,
Well, and I
so
really
yeah, Nadia has a question,
sharing
and you're
that.
probably going to get into this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Nadia posted a question in the chat as well about what are some of the productivity tools that you use to get back on track. I've just let myself go and have a bad day. I've been just like, okay, we are in a pandemic. I do not have to be productive every day.
And I agree with that wholeheartedly. You know, that was where I landed. So there were two things. One is that I think, Jen, what you're saying is very important. And I'm guessing that if you've shown up on this call, you're a relatively high achiever, you're, about self-improvement, growing your business and all, making a contribution. And sometimes you just might have a day where you're not going to be on your game, and that's okay. One other small tool that I use, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later in today's chat, is I like to do a midday check-in. And I like to do this anyway, but especially these days where it's easy also for the days to run together if you're working from a home office, right? You don't have the usual delineation of going, say, and meeting with people in person, or going to dinner, or maybe going to the gym, or whatever it is that you do, how your day is structured. So that midday check-in, and that is something I used on that really off day I had a few weeks ago, is to look at what were the tasks I had planned to do for the day. What are the meetings I've anticipated? And now that I'm sitting here at lunchtime, how's the day shaping up? And one of my challenges is I tend to overestimate how much I can do in a day. And so I often need that check-in. And I really needed it that day when I lost an hour to, technical issues in the office. And I just lost some focus as well. And I had to acknowledge, I'm not going to get the things done that I thought I was going to get done this afternoon. So it is important that I show up for these client meetings, and I'm going to focus on giving everything I can to those meetings. And then I had some other tasks that I needed to do in the business that really could have been done anytime that week. I wanted to do them that day, and I moved those and reprioritized those to another day. And they were focused tasks that I wasn't going to be super effective at. And so that's a really nice tool to use just any day, is that quick check-in to see, how's my day going? Where do I need to adjust course? And in that, being kind to yourself, knowing that you are in a situation where you've got more energy than you may realize. It's in the background running based on what's going on. So I think there's another chat question. I may have inadvertently dismissed it. Shall I move on, or is there another question?
The other question was about productivity tools that you use to get back on track. So I think that was part of it.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And so, that just touches on really this next slide, which is the importance of resilience, and how we view adversity and stress affects how we succeed. And one of the things that psychology research tells us is that most of us have some fairly negative kind of stories running in the background. We may or may not be aware of it, but it's a human nature, human tendency. And so we want to cultivate more positive stories to build that resilient mindset. And that's important for us as individuals, but it's also important for our businesses, right? And the organizations that we work in. And the really good news is that resilience is not something you either have or you don't. You're not like born with it, and those are the lucky few and the rest of us are not. You really can cultivate it and strengthen it. And I can tell you, this is something that I work on and I teach and train individuals and organizations to build. It takes time, but I'm going to share some habits and tools, and we're going to go through a couple of exercises right now today that I hope will help you in the moment. And we're going to focus on building your resilience as an individual. We won't talk about the business and the organizational side of it. We just don't have time today. But how you can do this, and it's so important during this uncertain time. And so there are three things that's going to help you do. It's going to help you protect yourself as you become more resilient. You're going to protect yourself against those situations and those experiences that could otherwise be overwhelming. I work with one of the women that I'm coaching up in the Toronto area, had to be self-quarantined for 14 days. She lived in an apartment by herself, and she got completely overwhelmed. She didn't raise her hand for help, didn't acknowledge how much it was stressing her out until she almost had a breakdown. What you want to do is protect yourself against situations. That's an extreme example and an extreme situation. of reaching that point of overwhelm. And what you want to do is try to bring yourself back from the cliff, right? And not even go close to it if you can. It's also going to help us to maintain the balance in our lives and our businesses and our relationships during these difficult times. And the third thing, which I think is really important, is that it helps us to begin to get out of our comfort zone and to challenge ourselves to try new ventures, whether it's taking on a new project at work or reaching out to new sets of clients in your business, or in some way expanding or pivoting your work. As you get more and more resilient, you can move out of that space of worry or overwhelm into a place where you're much more productive and creative, and you're coming up with positive and realistic solutions. And so as I think about, resilient leaders, the fact is that they're not really any different. They're facing challenges like all of us face daily, and we're all going to fail from time to time. And some of the leaders that I know I respect the most have been through very challenging times and huge, very public failures even. And so the first thing I want to invite you all to do is just to accept that that is an inevitable part of living. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to occasionally just fall flat on our faces. And we can pick ourselves up, or we can wallow in the fact that, we messed up and we're never going to succeed. And the only way, in my opinion, that we can avoid that kind of experience is if we live a very sheltered or limited life where we're not trying anything new, we're not taking risk. And very few people want to have that life. So the resilient leaders that I know and work with are seeing changes and challenges as opportunities. So they're practicing reframing those challenges and opportunities into, how can I grow from this? How can I learn? And they're also, if they didn't have it innately, they're cultivating a calm confidence, in their own ability to cope. And my belief is that no one just has that innately all the time. I've worked with business leaders who have hundreds of millions of dollars and success in a way that most of us look to that and think, what could they possibly be worried about? And they've acknowledged, I overdid it because I'm not very confident and I just overshot the mark, and so everyone has different challenges and different ways that we can become more resilient. And in being more resilient, we can also become more confident, and so that quality of a resilient mindset can really carry you through a challenging time. And to parse that down, before I share these 4 habits, to parse down the 3 most essential elements that I see in those resilient leaders as resilient people. One is that challenge as opportunity that I was just talking about. So being very intentional about seeing a challenge as an opportunity as opposed to a paralyzing event. When I think of the woman that am still working with, who's up in Toronto, that she really got paralyzed a couple of weeks in, and she was facing a lot of challenges, and it's understandable, and we're all human. We want to build that resilience, so we don't find ourselves in a paralyzing event, right? So we want to practice looking at failures, mistakes as lessons that we can learn and opportunities that we can grow from, versus a negative reflection on us or a negative reflection on our self-worth, and it's very easy, Jen, as you mentioned earlier, like, okay, we're all maybe in this category of non-essential businesses, right? Are we non-essential? No, we're very essential to someone. I think of what Jen is doing and leading the Creative Coast and putting together opportunities for us to meet in the community and share our experiences in a way that is supportive and empowering. I think that's as essential as ever right now, whatever our, leaders may say, or whatever the talking points in the media may be. And so, just reframing where we are, what we're being told by ourselves, our own thought process, what others might be saying, and staying with that question of, how can I get an opportunity of growth from this? Or what is it that I can learn? The second big one is a commitment to their lives and their goals. And so the very resilient leaders that I work with, and people and organizations, this is relevant, of course, to organizations, is that they have a commitment to their goals. So not only have they made some goals, but they're really committed to those, and it gives them a compelling reason to get out of bed, even on the bad days. And obviously that's a commitment that's not limited to work. So my view is that success is really a very holistic thing, and resilience is holistic. So even though we want to have some lines perhaps between our work day and our personal lives, and there's a lot of value in that, we're still one person. And so what happens to us at work is likely going to impact us in the evening when we're with our family and friends and loved ones, and vice versa. If we have a loss or we have a close friend or family member that's impacted in some way, we're human and we're probably carrying that over into our work day. And so this commitment to our lives and goals is a very holistic commitment that has to do with what are you committing to in your relationships? How is it that you want to show up? What are you committing to with your family, your spouse, your children, your friendships, the causes that you care about, your personal values, your religious, your spiritual beliefs. And then the third one is a focus on personal impact. And this goes back to that example I was sharing of my day that just kind of went off the rails, is spending time and energy focusing on the situations and the events that you have control over. And so there's a lot happening right now, obviously, that we just have absolutely no control over. But if you can focus your efforts on where you can have an impact and where you do have choice, it's going to help you feel more empowered and confident. So even on that day when things went off the rails, I was able to do my midday check-in, which is a little quick productivity tool that I use to reassess priorities for the afternoon. What am I realistically going to be able to accomplish? And where do I need to reshuffle if I've overloaded myself and I need to move some things to the next day, or if I had an unexpected 1 or 2 hour technical issue that, is now means I've lost 1 or 2 hours of work. I could have spent a lot of time worrying about that. It was an uncontrollable event, and it could, lead me down that road of feeling helpless and powerless and gosh, now the day's shot. And sometimes that happens, but what you want to try to cultivate is, where can I have an impact? Okay, so that did happen. Where can I still have an impact today? So we're in a situation in uncharted waters in our community and in our country. So that is where we are. Where can you still make an impact? And we're going to talk more specifically about some ideas around that as we go forward. So before I get into the 4 habits, I want to just pause and see if there are other questions, comments.
So a lot of people, it's Jen again, a lot of people don't necessarily know this, but I was quarantined for 14 days. So on March 11th, I went to a meeting, and out of that meeting, apparently there was potentially 4 people that might have had it. And I found out on March 12th and self-quarantined for 14 days because I have elderly parents and issues there, and I wanted to be able to still help. I'm kind of the secondary caregiver for my father. So I go over and I give my mom a break, but if I'm potentially sick, I can't do that. So I self-quarantined for 14 days. And what the Creative Coast is doing right now came out of the first 4 days of those that quarantine. Because at first I went, I was 24/7 on the news, trying to understand what was going on, just going down into the pit of despair. And by Monday, Monday the 16th, I got online with Kate and I said, okay, we're not going to be consumers of this content anymore. We're going to be creators of new content that can help our audience. This is what we're going to do.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Everything to Zoom, and Kate came up with the idea of sharing these good news stories of people that are helping the community. And it got me out of the woods of being just watching all this content that people are creating about this situation. I was like, okay, well, I can't impact any change there, but maybe we can help our tribe survive this.
Well, and I really appreciate you sharing that and doing that, and it's one of the things that I'll talk about now, and I'm going to talk about a little bit later too, is this idea of just what you did, Jen. Separate yourself a bit from we're in this 24/7 news cycle already, and it's fairly negative most of the time, and that's a lot to take in. And so that that battery is running down in the background because we're trying to sort through some really uncertain, fearful, and literally life-threatening news that could impact any of us and our families and friends. And so, it's not to make light of that, but then finding where can you come in and share some positive news. And I have a girlfriend who's an executive producer at CNN, and she has, in the midst of this, gotten to do segments just like you're proposing, Jen, on positive stories. What are some positive stories we can share so that we can focus on a more positive vision and outcome versus, all of these worst case scenarios, which it's necessary for our planners and politicians to consider, but we don't want to live with that in our head 24/7 if we can avoid it.
Yeah. So obviously I never had it, but I did stay at home because the testing is so bad that it took 14 days to get test results for these people.
Well, I'm curious if when you were at home, was there something that you can point to and you had that shift after day 4 and you said, I'm going to do something about this? Did it just hit you? Was there something that you did that you think helped?
Well, I was literally sitting on the couch feeling sorry for myself, and I was technically on vacation. So I had taken off the 13th, the 16th, and the 17th. Our offices were closed for St. Patrick's Day. So I'm like, I had taken off for a 5-day weekend with the intent of going to the beach and exercising and doing a household project, project in the house. And on Monday, I was like, I haven't left the couch in 4 days. I haven't been exercising. I didn't, go to the beach at all. And I certainly haven't started that household project, which I have supplies for, and I still haven't done, by the way. But I was like, I'm on vacation, and I'm like sitting on the couch feeling like lost and depressed and like, oh my God, the world is ending. And I'm like, okay, I got to do something. So I just was like, I can't control that, but what can I control? Yeah. And if I'm feeling this way, other people I know are feeling this way. I just hit me faster because I did the math, right? So on around 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning on March 11th, I was potentially exposed to the virus. Mm-hmm. Didn't know about it until about 2 o'clock the next day, March 12th. I came in contact with 20 people.
Wow.
Between March 11th, 10:30 in the morning, and 2 o'clock in the afternoon the following day. And I immediately went to, I could be like patient 0 in Savannah, Georgia. I'm the person that spreads the virus because that is my normal day, meeting with 10 to 20 people. Yeah. In the course of a day and an event. And so I was like, wow.
And you were on the early stages of, I think, the awareness down in this region.
Yeah, I could be carrier. I could be the asymptomatic carrier that spreads this to everyone I meet with, right? And so I'm like, and I have a father with Alzheimer's, and he's not well, and I was just like, okay. And I'm the person that goes over there 3 times a week and gives my mom a break. So I was like, I've got to lock down. I've got to do that, and then to this spent, listening to everything, looking up. I became the expert on COVID-19, by the way. I still am kind of into the data. I'm really interested in the data right now that's coming out, but because I was a math geek in college, right? So the data is really interesting to me. And
I think there's an argument too that understanding the data and informing yourself, that's an area that you can have impact, right? The more informed you are, the better you understand what is out there to understand, then you can make a more informed decision about, do I go care for my parents? Do I go to the grocery store? And if I do I wear a mask? And at what time do I go, et cetera?
I have some very stylish masks arriving today in the mail. But no, so yeah. And the other thing I'm working on right now is I need to know all this data because I have to figure out when to reopen the Creative Coast space. I mean, technically, according to the governor's order, I could open on Monday, mm-hmm. as long as we apply social distancing. And so what do I do there? So I've been trying to follow along and talk to other people that run co-working spaces or similar. What are their plans? And staying informed that way. But I really think, that being an entrepreneur, for the last 30 years, I do have kind of a tendency to sometimes go into this like pessimistic, my life is a little bit like this, right? I'm either totally optimistic and like shooting for the stars, or you get this self-doubt, right, as an
Yeah.
entrepreneur, where you just kind of go into this hole and you're just like, oh, this is never going to work. Now, the hard thing is, as a CEO or CTO, founder of these organizations that I've run, that is the worst place to go, because you're alone. You can't say that out loud, because you've convinced somewhere between 20 and 300 people to go on this journey with you.
Yeah.
Right. And you can't let them know that you ever have a second of self-doubt. And so I have, I guess, built resiliency. I don't know that I would have called it that before, but I have built this thing like, okay, occasionally I'm going to go to this pit and get down on this and that, but I can never show that to the outside world of my startups. So I have to power through it myself and pull myself out of it, and then I can go out to the world.
Well, and I appreciate you sharing that, because what I see is that everyone has that, as you say, certainly entrepreneurs, and you can argue that it's a healthy self-doubt, as long as you have a way to move through it. But everyone's got it, and everyone's got questions, right? And I sometimes wonder if we shouldn't be talking about this more openly in forums like you created today to do just that, to acknowledge that, people, I think, look to me and think, wow, what a successful person. She's really got it together. I was like from college, top of my class at Georgia Tech, and then went out, and it looks like a smooth ride, but it certainly has not. And I also have those peaks and valleys and days when I think, what the heck was I thinking starting my own business, and so we all have that, I think, to some degree or another. And it's, learning the tools that work for us. And it's not the same for everyone. I'm going to share some that I've seen be very effective. And some of them you're sharing right now, Jen. How do you, when you have those times of self-doubt, that's probably not the time to tell the whole team you're having self-doubt, right? Get through it. But then you're sharing here in a very empowering way that you do have that's just, you're human. You're like, everyone else in that way. And you're also a successful leader, and you're creating forums to help, the community during this challenging time, et cetera. And so it's a bit of a both and, I think. Yes, we have it. And what are we going to do about it? Right.
Yeah.
So that really ties into this first habit, which is another one of those that sounds nice and easy, but it isn't always, right? And that habit there are 4 habits I'm going to share of resilient leaders that I see translating into both personal success in terms of our relationships and the quality of our relationships and the quality of our lives when we're not working, and our professional success, whether you own your own business and, whether you're leading teams or a part of a team. And that is, how can you cultivate a positive image of the future and maintain a more positive outlook and envision brighter days ahead when you find yourself in that period of self-doubt, or this shared communal experience that we're all in right now, where there's a lot of uncertainty. And even as we look to our leader here in Georgia, our governor, and then we hear our national leader, the president, is disagreeing with the governor's call. I saw that in the Wall Street Journal this morning. And so even our leaders are disagreeing about how to handle this very uncertain time. And some of the science is there and some of it just isn't, right? There are a lot of unknowns. And so the first thing I want to say, and I mentioned this earlier, is that this is not, in my perspective, about putting a Band-Aid over a difficult situation or pretending that everything is okay. It's instead about taking a very realistic assessment. Like Jen was sharing, I have these periods of self-doubt, and I know when I'm in them, So recognizing that in yourself, like finding, when I had that day that went off the rails, it went off the rails. It wasn't a day I was super proud of, or that I got a lot done, but I acknowledged that had happened. And then I took a look at, well, what could I do differently? And so there are 3 tools that you can do to try to cultivate that more. And one is having clear intentions. And so personally, I go into a week and I go into the day with intentions about how I'd like that day to go. And they generally translate into things like, I want to communicate clearly in a way that I'm heard by my clients, and I'm helpful to them, and they're able to receive my message. So these are a little bit softer than goals. It's more about the experience of the day and the week. that I want to end the week knowing that I provided value, because that gives me a lot of fulfillment to know that I'm contributing in some way. So that's one tip here in this habit. And I invite you to, I know, Jen, you're recording this, but if these resonate with you, jot one or two down that you're going to try, and I'll share a quick exercise if we've got time with each of these. And they're very quick, so I think we will have time. A second is that you can cultivate a positive image with visualization. And I'm going to take you guys through a short visualization and have it, I think it's number 4. So that's literally closing your eyes and painting a mental picture of a more positive scenario. And there's a lot of interesting science behind effective visualization tools, and that athletes, for instance, who have been injured and can't physically work out in the way they're used to, when they're trained in using positive visualization, they can actually maintain and even increase their muscle tone by visualizing doing the exercise that they would normally be doing physically. So there's a lot of power with visualization. The third piece of this is having solid goals. And so in addition to those intentions of your experience, having goals, and not just a plan, but a real desire to achieve those. And I generally recommend writing those goals down. It's nice to carry them around in your head, but it's also good when you're having those off days to have your goals written down so you can go back to, why the heck was I doing this in the first place? And it's right there in front of you. And then the last thing I'll mention on this, and then I'll take you through a short exercise, is that you want to reframe change and failure, or anything that's a seemingly negative occurrence. And so you want to reframe it into that learning and growth mindset that we were talking about. And I'll take you through a quick reframing exercise. And basically a question that you can ask is, how can I view this situation as a learning and growth opportunity? Or if your goal is that you want to make a contribution, how can I view this situation as a way that how can I make that contribution given the situation? And so just asking these questions sets you on a different emotional train, right? The track is now in a more positive direction versus that negative direction of, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? This is, I had no plans. I never anticipated this. I'm stuck. I'm paralyzed. And so I want to invite you, and if you do have a pen and paper handy, you may want to jot this down, to think of a time when things didn't go as planned for you or someone that you respect, and how you dealt with it in a resilient way. If you did learn something from it, or if in hindsight you've learned from it. And then to consider how you might reframe a challenge that you're facing right now. And if anyone wants to share, I'd love to hear. You certainly don't have to. This is really meant for you. Is there something that you can reframe right now into an opportunity to learn, to grow? Yes, I see a hand raised. Can we unmute? Let's see.
Okay.
There we go. Erin.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I am in a big process. We're going on 5 years, Thanksgiving, when I walked into an ER and they misdiagnosed me. And then 8 days later, my mother found me unconscious with organ failure. So I was in an induced coma and in a hospital for a month, and released the day before Christmas. And then a year later in recovery, cognitive therapy, because I say I looked like a drunk first grader writing and everything. I was hit by an 18-wheeler. So I'm still in the grief process, is what somebody has said. And so I'm just trying to figure out how to let go. And I'm trying to, and moving to Savannah before all this happened, even finding a group of grief to maybe try and get rid of. I still have that anger. And I mean, I came here in June and August and was very happy. And part of it was because I still had stuff in Austin. So I had a backup plan. And now I don't know where I'm going to live. I don't know where my life is going to take me. And so there's some just fear and anger and scared. It's just, yeah, it's, yeah.
You've been through a lot. You've been
Yeah.
through a lot.
Yeah.
And the first thing that I would say is just to acknowledge, as you're doing with us today, that you have the fear and the anger, and that is an absolutely healthy and normal response. You know, I'm not a believer in, like just act through the fear, act like you don't have the fear. There are a lot of different things, act as if. I think it's healthy to acknowledge that it's there. And I mean, the hit that I'm getting as you're sharing is that finding ways now, given where you are, to care for yourself in a really big way. And I think this is important for everyone right now, but it's especially important given what you've been through. If there are ways that you can be more kind to yourself because you are in a grieving and a healing process, and that from that might open the door to be able to see and visualize some positive outcomes. But it's going to be hard when you're in a place of fear and anger to make the leap over to the emotional leap to the positive outcomes, if that
The
makes sense.
other piece is, though, that it was a viral, I think it was viral. So they misdiagnosed me, and all of this with the coronavirus 19 and all that, everyone's going to be focusing on that. And so when I say, oh, I had organ failure, everyone's like, oh, yeah, that's great. Look at you now. And no one acknowledges the process or that I'm here now. Or, they don't know how to recognize, or that, that people will be overriding happen now than what happened.
But you need to not do that. You have, this goes back to the personal impact. You have the ability, regardless of what anybody else is saying. And I'm not saying it's easy. And I'd be happy to have a follow-up conversation with you too, later, because I want to make sure we've got time for everyone to hear that.
Sorry. Yeah.
But I do want to just invite you to hold that space for yourself, regardless of what everyone else might or might not think or say. You have been through a hard time, and anger and fear are justified. And also, how can you begin to shift that?
Okay, cool.
I hope that's helpful.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so habit number 2, and this is getting back to that support and touching on what we were just talking about with self-care. It's really important to establish and nurture a supportive social network. And many of you may already have that. You've built good relationships with others, because that strong support team is more helpful than coping on your own. And there are many things that you can do. One of them is just making that intentional effort. I'll share 3 quick tips with this habit. One is just making that intentional effort. So you do reach out and you support others, and you also ask for help when you need it. And you build that over time. And that is a really important tool to help you deal with those failures, those stresses, the health challenges that many of us face, and that Erin was sharing, and other types of change. I'll share an example of my first boss back almost 25 years ago when I first graduated Georgia Tech. I worked in a consulting firm, and he still, to this day, I only worked there less than 4 years. To this day, he still calls me regularly to check in. And I can guarantee you he does this for everyone in his network. And it's a sincere outreach a few times a year. He's already called me during this crisis. Hey, Shannon, just checking in, want to see how you're doing. This is a former VP at Hewlett Packard who was the leader of their sales at a time of immense growth. And he understands the value of nurturing relationships, and he makes an intentional effort. and one of the pieces of this too that's important, we were just talking about, Erin, is then trying not to worry too much or let your mind go down that road about what others are thinking of you. Because, some people are going to think good things about us. Some people just won't like us. And most of the time, people won't understand the struggle that any one of us is going through individually, unless they're really close to us. And even then they may not. I myself went through a physical health struggle with Lyme disease, where I was not able to drive a car or speak coherently for a period of over a year. It was very disconcerting, and it's a not well understood disease. And even some of my close friends didn't really understand what was going on with me. And so that, I had to learn that I couldn't worry too much about what others thought of me. I had to take care of what my needs were as best I could and ask for help as best I could. And that leads to the third piece of this one, which is, I believe we can all cultivate more empathy and compassion for those that are in our network. And it starts with ourselves, and it's especially important during this time to realize that we do have a certain mindset and emotional toll that's running in the background, somewhat 24/7, given the circumstances that we're in. And so how can you establish some self-care routines for yourself that might be a new normal for you? Maybe you're not working as many hours as you expect to, or maybe you're making exercise a priority, or eating better, or you're going to call at least one friend or family member every day. So I just want to invite you to consider, what is one thing that you could commit to that would help you in this regard, that you could do in the next 24 hours. Maybe it's calling a good friend or a colleague you haven't spoken to in a while. Maybe it's something that's going to help you cultivate more empathy and compassion for yourself. But I want to invite you to just consider one thing that you're willing to do. So the third habit is cultivating self-confidence. And this is really important. And the key to this is that you avoid going down that train track of thinking of yourself as a victim of circumstance. We all have difficult challenges in life. Some people have really hard times in their business and financial struggles. Others have extreme adversity when it comes to health or relationships, or some combination of those things. And if I've learned anything in talking to many successful leaders, is that they also have been through those same circumstances, but they've cultivated a certain level of confidence and a view that they're not a victim of circumstance. And there are three things that I see that are done there. One is that focusing time and energy on changing the things they do have control over. So, in the situation that we're all in, we don't have control over these circumstances. We don't even have control over the fact that we might go into a store or a public setting and be exposed to someone who's not wearing a mask, or who comes too close and isn't respecting social distance. So we're in a fairly extreme circumstance, but there are still things that each and every one of us do have a personal impact over. We can control that impact. We can choose how we react, how we respond. And so the second piece of that is learning what those effective coping strategies are for you that help you deal with difficult emotions and stress. A few common ones that I see are very basic. They're making sure you're getting enough sleep most nights, making sure you're getting some physical exercise, and taking care of your diet. Those things have a very physical and direct impact on us. And I'm sure you've all had those experiences where you haven't had a very good night's sleep, and then you just weren't yourself. You weren't on your game the next day. I think I see a chat. Is there a question? I lost the chat.
It's more of a comment. Jeremy commented that it's a great point on not only developing and cultivating empathy for others, but also for yourself.
Oh, thank you, Jeremy. Yeah, we're so quick to think about others, but the more we can do that for ourselves, it's like the idea of when you're in the airplane and you're asked to put the oxygen mask on first before you help the person next to you, you'll be better able to show up in the way you want to if you're taking care of yourself. So let's move to this last one, which is the habit 4 of learning to embrace change And I'm going to invite you guys to go through a short visualization with me on this. It'll just be a couple of minutes. And this is really that idea of learning to be flexible and adaptable to constantly changing circumstances, and especially those circumstances that are beyond your control, which for the most part, most circumstances are. You know, we like to think that we're in control and we can focus on where we can make an impact, but things happen every day. We're in an extreme circumstance, but every day things are happening that are outside of our control. And so one of the things that I'm often coaching and consulting with clients to do is learning to not put too much energy into resisting those things that you can't control. And I find myself doing this. You know, I'll get frustrated at a situation and I realize I've put a lot of physical and emotional energy in just to resisting, like, I don't like where I am right now, or I don't like this particular person that I'm having to interact with, and yet they're in my client's team and there doesn't seem to be anything I can do about it, yet I'm resisting the reality that they're a challenging personality, whatever it might be. Learning to catch yourself so that you're not putting so much energy into resisting what is, and that's going to open up a space for you to take a more positive, proactive, and arguably successful action for your business, for yourself, for your teams. And so that ties into the second piece of this, which is then practicing embracing change. You know, there's a natural fear that comes up when we have any kind of change. And it's that survival instinct of, okay, this is something that's unknown, it's unfamiliar territory. And literally there's a reptilian part of our brain that is triggered that's worried about survival. And yet a lot of the stressors that we have right now are not like, you know, in the old days when a tiger might be chasing you through the jungle. You're probably going to survive, but there's a different kind of stress that you're dealing with day in and day out. And so we can spend a good bit of energy every day with that, and that can lead to a resistance and a stress that builds up over time and becomes a very real impact and works against your success. And so then the third piece of that is cultivating a more optimistic attitude and learning to flow more with the current of life rather than fighting it. And this is really important to remember, that it's not about giving up, but it is about finding some more creative solutions by accepting what is and creating that space. And so just a quick check-in. Are you guys up? Just, you can nod heads. Are you up to doing a 1 or 2 minute visualization to practice that? I'm seeing thumbs up. Okay. So just take a moment, close your eyes. Everyone's eyes are closed, so they're not watching. And I want you to take a few deep breaths and just allow yourself to imagine that you're sitting in a comfortable spot. You're placing, maybe there's a basket at your feet. You're placing your concerns into that basket, the things you need to do this afternoon. They'll be there. You can pick them up in a moment. But for the purpose of this exercise, just take a few breaths and allow yourself to be completely present with you. And I want you to imagine that you are in a boat and you're paddling. And right now you're paddling that boat upstream. And just give yourself the chance to feel what that feels like. You're paddling really hard and you're not making much progress. You're paddling against the current and it's a struggle, and you're looking over at the shore and you realize you're really not moving very far, but you're paddling really hard. And just allow yourself to feel that work, that effort, that struggle, because you're really determined to get down the river. And then allow yourself to just make the decision that right now the current is not flowing in the direction that you need it to go. And you're going to allow your boat to turn. You're going to adjust course and you're going to flow with the current rather than fighting it. And I want you to just imagine that you're turning the boat around. Maybe you're still paddling, you're still directing where the boat's going, but now you're suddenly flowing much more easily because you're flowing with the current rather than fighting it. And just notice if you felt even a subtle shift there, that is the space that I'm talking about that you can move into within a minute or two if you allow yourself to just embrace and accept what is. When you're ready, feel free to open your eyes. You're literally just making a small mental shift. So you're opening up a space where you can find and access the creative solutions to whatever the situation is that you're dealing with, that are going to be much harder. I promise they're much harder to find when you're in that place where you're fighting and struggling and resisting. And we can all find ourselves there because we have circumstances that we are not happy about. And so that's a quick exercise that you can do at any time, just to shift and find a place of more opening. And so as a wrap up today, and I'm happy to share these slides, Jen, if you'd like, if others want to have these notes, but remember to practice self-care, especially during this time. Remember to practice awareness of your thoughts. So if you've got negative thoughts that are creeping in, listen to how you're talking to yourself. If you're finding them overly permanent, pervasive, or personalized, like I always deliver these deliverables late, or I always have trouble communicating with so-and-so, try to redirect that to, I had trouble today, or I was behind schedule today, and what can I do differently tomorrow? Reframing to change the way you think about negative perceived events, situations, looking for ways to learn from those. And then remembering to be intentional and keep perspective. And remember that you can always choose your response. We can't choose what happens to us, but we can choose how we respond. And so I think we've just got a few minutes for any lasting questions. And I'm happy to share my contact information is here. I'd be happy for anyone that's on the call today to set up a short complimentary strategy session if you'd like to talk further as well.
Awesome, thank you. Jeremy had a comment. I think he was being funny, but I actually was like, okay, I'm getting my workout, paddling up the creek. This is awesome. Notice I was kayaking.
That's a really good point, that, you know, there are times when, you know, a bit of struggle is good, right? It's recognizing when am I just trying to get somewhere and I'm not making progress, and I may need to pause and adjust course and find that opening.
Yeah, I was thinking though, I like to go up creek against the tide in the first half of the workout so I can coast back home.
Yeah, right. And that translates as well, right? If you're always paddling and you're not really making progress, somewhere you need to adjust course. But if you've got a plan where, you know, I'm going to paddle really hard the first few hours of the day, I've got this difficult task, but I'm going to save some easy work at the end of the day. I can handle that, right? And we have a different mix. I know people that can paddle really hard for 5-6 hours a day, and others that they're going to get 2 hours, and they know that about themselves, and they need to make the rest of the day work that comes to them more easily.
All right, so Jeremy saw himself flipping the boat and drowning, and Kat saw alligators everywhere.
So I would say you want to navigate the boat around the alligators, avoid the alligators, and avoid visualizing drowning. Are there any questions?
Anyone have any questions before we sign off? It is 12:59, so I do want to be mindful of people's time. Thank you, Shannon. This was awesome. I really enjoyed it. It was good seeing you as well.
Good to see you too. Good to see everyone. Thanks for being here.